Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 66, Old Friends, 1. Although the matriarch was getting along in age, there weren't many other family members who could take charge of the entire estate. Thus, matriarchy had a hand in managing each courtyard. Every day, someone would come to report the actions of the courtyard's masters. Several days ago, the matriarch had gotten a taste of Chu Lian's candied kumquats. Matriarch he had even specially praised them. Previously, whenever any guest of note visited the Jinggan estate, they would definitely be served some of Cook Zhou's special snacks. However, these special snacks had passed away with Cook Zhou in the Great Kitchen Fire. For the guests that visited them now, the snacks seemed to have turned disappointingly ordinary. Their current guest was an old madam from House Xianghua. She was an old friend from back when matriarch he was still an unmarried young lady. Their friendship had endured for decades. From their youth, all the way up until now, when they were both the matriarchs of their respective families. It was only natural that a friendship such as theirs couldn't be compared to the relations between other noble ladies. Old Duchess Zhanghua was curious. She had never seen Chu Lian before. She used this fact to tease matriarch he. "Hey, my dear sister, why didn't you tell me that your granddaughter-in-law knows how to make desserts? Now that your pastry chef is gone, eating snacks here isn't as enjoyable as it used to be." The two of them were old friends, so they could speak more freely with each other. Thus, matriarch he ordered senior servant Lu to serve the pastries that Chu Lian had made. When senior servant Lu lifted the lid of the container, she couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise. Matriarch he glared at her a little unhappily. "Matriarch, please forgive my rudeness. These desserts simply looked too beautiful and I lost my composure." "Oh? What kind of dessert could make Shang Yun lose her composure? Quick, bring it out and show me," Old Duchess Zhanghua urged. Shang Yun was senior servant Liu's name when she had been a young maidservant. By the time senior servant Liu finished placing the desserts on a small side table, even the two matriarchs who had seen many a dessert in their time were wide-eyed. The shaved ice dessert was not only fragrant, but also visually pleasing. Served in a porcelain bowl, the various colors of the fruits contrasted well against both the white of the dish and that of the milk. A few red orchids were arranged by the side of the bowl, making it look more like a piece of art than a midday treat. They almost couldn't bear to eat it. On the other hand, there was a clear, round water droplet that looked extremely interesting. It was served in a long, shallow dark green bowl. There was a single lotus leaf underneath the droplet, and served beside it was brown syrup and soybean powder. It looked just like a large bead of morning dew as it rested atop the lotus leaf. They had never seen anything quite like it before. While the two madams were admiring the desserts, senior servant Lu spoke up. "Matriarch, third young madam said that it would have been a waste if she didn't make some desserts with the ice you sent over today. Thus, in return, she sent over this ice dessert and raindrop mochi. However, these two desserts are cold, so please don't eat too much of it since your bodies might not be able to take it." Old Duchess Zhanghua curiously looked up. "You sent ice over?" Matriarch he took the initiative to explain how Changdi had rushed off to the northern border. That child had clearly arranged everything early on, but he had only left a letter behind to explain where he had gone. She had sent Dalong to look for him, but there had been no news at all after most of the day had passed. It was obvious that Changdi had already decided on this plan of his and had made his preparations beforehand. What a pity for her newlywed granddaughter-in-law. Old Duchess Zhanghua frowned. "Sister, you have to arrange things carefully and make sure the servants in your estate keep their mouths shut. Otherwise, your granddaughter-in-law's good name might be tarnished." "Of course I know that. That grandson of mine caused too much trouble this time." Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator TMR Chapter 67. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 67. Old Friends, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. No matter what, Changdi was matriarch he's favorite grandson. She couldn't bear to blame him despite what he had done. Furthermore, he had already come of age. He was supposed to strike out on his own and make something of himself anyway. The Jinggan estate could not afford to keep any lazy masters around. Though, matriarch he did blame Changdi for leaving so hurriedly without speaking with his family first. As for Chu Lian's reputation, Changdi didn't seem to care much for his new wife anyway, so how could he have possibly made any considerations for her good name? Let's not talk about that now. Let's try out the desserts my granddaughter-in-law made. Old Duchess Zhenghua smiled and graciously accepted a silver spoon that one of the maidservants passed to her. She then scooped up a small bite of the shaved ice and carefully tasted it. The taste of fruits soaked in honey, sweetened lotus, fresh water chestnut, and fragrant milk mixed in her mouth. It was ice-cold, refreshing, and carried the lovely taste of fruit. It was the best dessert you could have in this blistering summer heat. Old Duchess Zhenghua immediately nodded her appreciation after only tasting a single bite. After living for so many years, I've never had such a delicious dessert before. Old sister, you're quite fortunate, aren't you? Matriarch he hadn't really had any expectations towards Chu Lian, but her culinary skills had earned her old friend's praise and had given her something to be proud of. She immediately smiled from ear to ear, temporarily forgetting all about the melancholy and worry that Changdi's sudden departure had brought about. The two old duchesses were both getting on in age, so they didn't dare to eat much more of the cold desserts, delicious as they were. In the end, they held themselves back and only ate half a bowl each. The servants by their sides also relaxed upon seeing this. I can't just partake in a gift from a junior for nothing. Here, help me give this bracelet to that granddaughter-in-law of yours. You'll have to let me take a look at her one of these days. Old Duchess Zhenghua took off the emerald jade bracelet on her wrist as she spoke. The bracelet was clearly one of high quality, judging from the way the emerald streaked through the jade. Matriarch he understood the personality of her old friend well, so she didn't reject the gift and let senior servant Lu accept it. I heard your grandson, Mr. Chang, likes eating interesting desserts like these. Why don't you take the rest of it home with you? I won't stand on ceremony with you then. Little Chang does love new desserts. Mr. Cheng's full name was Zhang Tiancheng, and he was Duke Zhenghua's heir. He was the same age as Changdi and was also a young master born from the main branch of the family. However, he was the only legitimate son in his generation living in the Zhenghua estate, so old Duchess Zhenghua doted on him very much. Heir Zhenghua liked to eat good food, especially the snacks from the Jing'an estate. Old Duchess Zhenghua would always bring some back for her grandson every time she visited Matriarch He. She was still lamenting Cook Zhou's loss, but now that Matriarch He had given her the snacks made by her granddaughter-in-law, she was happy again. Senior servant Lu remembered the advice that Xian had given her when she had brought the desserts over. Third young madam said that this dessert can't be kept for more than half a day. Otherwise, it'll spoil. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div, gpt, add, 1505873300429-0. Old Duchess Zhenghua laughed out loud. All right, I understand. It's getting late, so I'll return now. Old sister, don't worry too much about your Sanlang. I'll ask my husband to keep an ear out for news in a few days. After exchanging some courtesies, Matriarch he sent her old friend away. When old Duchess Zhenghua returned home, she coincidentally encountered her grandson returning home, too. He was dressed in a round-necked sapphire blue robe with a jade crown on his head. Although he had an average figure, his eyes would slightly crinkle whenever he smiled, making him appear quite warm and friendly. Grandmother, where did you go today? Old Duchess Zhenghua chuckled. You little monkey. Are you trying to mind your grandmother's business now? Grandmother went to the Jing'an estate to visit an old friend. This is for you. The personal maidservant standing behind the Duchess passed over a small container with some cool vapor rising from it. The signature snacks of the Jing'an estate? No, not at all. The new third young madam of the Jing'an estate made this. Go and try them quickly. They can't keep for long. Grandmother's tired now, so grandmother will head back and rest. Don't disturb me. Heir Zhenghua took the snacks. He remembered that his senior brother from the Imperial College, Senior Xiao, had just come to visit him, so he hurried to the outer court. TL note: Mr. Chang is the male equivalent of Miss Su and Miss Yuan. It's a way to address a child of a noble house, both respectfully and affectionately, depending on the speaker. Naming a noble by their full name is considered disrespectful, so they tend to use titles paired with their surnames. Mr., Miss, Madam, Lord, Lady, etc. Duchess Zhanghua actually used Mr. Chung as well, but it doesn't really make sense in English to call your own grandson Mr., so I made it a little more affectionate with little. The Chung comes from the last character of his name, and not his surname. Chinese names are usually made up of a surname, optional middle name, and a first name. The optional middle name is usually shared amongst direct siblings in the modern world, but only amongst brothers in ancient China. So if you see a Zheng Ti on something, that's most likely Zheng Tianqing's brother. The heirs of noble houses are referred to with a specific title, Shizhi, that I've translated into heir XXX. Just remember that heir Zhanghua equals heir of House Zhanghua, and that his full name is Zheng Tianqing. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator TMR Chapter 68. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 68. Personal Savings 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. When heir Zhanghua reached the outer court's parlor, he saw two young men dressed in black robes, already seated and waiting for him. He quickly strode forward, and the two young men stood up to welcome him. Heir Zhanghua. Ah, senior brothers, please don't stand on ceremony. Please call me Tianqing. Sit down, sit down. Of the two young men, one of them was exceptionally handsome. Of course, that was Xiao Bojian. The other young man, Chu Lian, lived in the same place as Xiao Bojian. He had a square face and thick eyebrows, and he looked a little old. Chu Lian came from one of the great clans of Jiangnan, and he was very loyal to his clan. The two young men were top students of the Imperial College. They were both about 20 years old, the time when many youths were filled with lofty aspirations. When Chu Lian saw that heir Zhanghua had come holding a container in his hands, he found it strange and asked, Tianqing, what are you holding there? Heir Zhanghua chuckled secretively and invited the two of them to sit by a table. He then ordered the maidservants to pour some sancha for them. He placed the container on the table carefully and said, These are snacks from the Jing'an estate. Chu Lian was born from nobility and was used to all sorts of delicacies. He was extremely particular about anything he ate. Having studied at the Imperial College for more than 3 years, Chu Lian knew all about the food served in every single estate in the capital. He had researched the topic until he knew it like the back of his hand. The Jing'an estate's snacks were famous, but he had never had the chance to try any before. When he heard that Tianqing was currently in possession of some, he was both surprised and elated. Xiao Bojian blanked out for a moment. The Jing'an estate was Chu Lian's husband's family. The image of the young man he had seen accompanying Chu Lian in the Ingwer estate flashed through his mind. With elegantly arched brows, a cold aura, and thin lips, that man had placed himself between him and Chu Lian, held onto her hand, and left, without even letting him have another look at her. Heir Zhanghua noticed that Xiao Bojian was in a daze. Senior Xiao? We'll be enjoying these snacks all thanks to you then, Tianqing. Heir Zhanghua smiled freely and opened up the container, which still felt cool. There was thick cotton cloth stuffed on the inside, keeping heat out of the box and maintaining the cool temperature inside. When heir Zhanghua saw the desserts within the box, he froze for a moment. This, Tianqing, what happened? Heir Zhanghua brought out the desserts in the box, still a little shaken. Look at this, Google tag. Command push function, Google tag. Display, div, GPT, add, 1505873300429-0. He had eaten plenty of different snacks before, including even the ones from the palace, but never had heir Zhanghua ever seen such beautiful, distinctive snacks like these before. Xiao Bojian and Chu Lian were equally stunned. Chu Lian lamented, No wonder everyone says that the Jing'an estate snacks are the best amongst the noble families. They are indeed extraordinary. The water droplet lying upon the lotus leaf trembled like a real dewdrop. However, heir Zhanghua frowned slightly. Chu Lian had noticed that he looked a little off, so he called to him, perplexed. Tianqing? Heir Zhanghua looked up at the two men. Truth be told, I've eaten the snacks from the Jing'an estate many times. They really are as delicious as rumored, but it's the first time I've seen a dessert like this. After saying so, heir Zhanghua recalled what his grandmother had told him when she had given him the desserts. Grandmother had said that these were made by the new third young madam of the Jing'an estate. When he remembered that, Heir Zhenghua quickly sent his personal manservant off to the inner court to ask the old duchess, "Oh, has House Jing'an changed the way they make their pastries?" Chimin chuckled. "Grandmother told me that these were made by the third young madam of House Jing'an." The other two didn't notice when Xiao Bojian's entire body stiffened. It was a cruel coincidence that the next joke out of Chi Min's mouth was, "The third young madam of House Jing'an? Isn't that the granddaughter of old Duke Ingwa?" He turned to Xiao Bojian. "Bojian, old Duke Ingwa is your sponsor. Have you seen this third young madam for yourself when you were at the Ingwa estate?" Even though his body was still a little stiff, Xiao Bojian replied with a normal expression, "Although I lived in the Ingwa estate for some time, how could I, an outsider, possibly have entered the inner court of a duke's estate? Don't joke around." He had an open face and good looks, so it was hard for people to doubt him. Chimin quickly apologized. "I went too far." They chatted as they watched the maidservants pour sancha for them. Finally, the manservant that Heir Zhenghua had sent to the old duchess returned. "How was it?" Heir Zhenghua asked. The manservant slightly bowed to show his respect as he said, reporting to the heir, "The Jing'an estate's resident pastry chef passed away in a kitchen fire 2 days ago. The desserts that the duchess brought back today were indeed made by the third young madam of House Jing'an. She even named the dessert as raindrop mochi." Heir Zhenghua was a little stunned. What a pity that the amazing pastry chef was gone just like that. However, a cook was just a servant to the nobility. If they were gone, then they were gone. Heir Zhenghua didn't say anything more and waved the manservant away. "Come, let's stop talking. I was told that these desserts don't keep for long. Senior brothers, why don't you have a taste?" They took up little silver spoons and tasted each of the desserts. Heir Zhenghua and Chi Min's eyes lit up, and they only had praise for the desserts. There was something special about pairing the refreshingly smooth raindrop mochi with sancha. Only Xiao Bojian dwelled on his bitter feelings alone, a dark glint flashing through the depths of his eyes. He thought of the girl who had now become the third young madam of House Jing'an, a tender, gentle, brave, and careful woman. If not for her engagement, perhaps she would be personally brewing soups for him at home right now. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div, gpt, add, 1505873300429-1. The first person to taste this new, delicious raindrop mochi would have been him. The person showing off his perfect wife in front of his fellow students would also be him. Under the cover of his broad sleeves, his hands curled into fists until his knuckles turned white. TL note, Heir Zhenghua calls them senior brothers or Shixiang in reference to them being his seniors at school. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator TMR Chapter 69. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 69. Personal Savings 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Meanwhile, back at the Jing'an Estate's Songtao court, Chu Lian was peacefully sleeping, completely unaware of all that had transpired. After eating the desserts with the servants, Chu Lian had retired to her bedroom. There was a small study by the bedroom she shared with He Sanlang, and it was meant for her use. It wasn't very big, but since it was right next to the bedroom, it was convenient. Chu Lian whiled away her afternoon inside the small study. The books she had brought over from the Ingwer estate were placed on the bookshelves here, as well as the books that the Jing'an estate had added on. There weren't many of them. On the bottommost shelf, there was a pear blossom wood container with copies of some of the works by a few famous calligraphy masters. In the original story, although Chu Lian hadn't been exceptional in calligraphy, her handwriting had still been neat, delicate, and pretty. Chu Lian didn't have any big ambitions, but she still understood that her calligraphy skills weren't good enough. She couldn't even read all of the traditional Chinese characters in that comedy book she had been reading. She usually just guessed at them. Thus, come afternoon, Chu Lian sent away her maidservants and left Xiyan to guard the door outside. Then, in the safety of the study, she practiced her writing in secret, making use of an empty book that she had found earlier. After writing for 2 hours, Chu Lian tossed the previously empty book into the charcoal brazier and burned it. She had a good memory, so the 2 hours of practice was good enough to learn over 100 or so characters. Chu Lian was pretty satisfied with her progress. Following her calligraphy practice, Chu Lian sent Xian out to bring back the box she kept her money and accessories in. She wanted to see exactly how much money she had. Senior servant Gue watched from the side. First, Chu Lian looked at the public account books, where the expenses of their courtyard had been recorded. Every month, they would be given a stipend from the Jing'an household. Of course, the salaries of all the servants in their courtyard were to be paid from this stipend. There was almost 80 taels of silver in the public account. These were saved up from the time when Changdi had been the sole master residing in this courtyard, and when there had been fewer servants around. Otherwise, in most situations, the stipend wouldn't be enough to cover the monthly expenses, and they would have to fork out a portion of their own personal accounts. Chu Lian put down the account books and ordered Xian to open up the chest where they kept the silver for daily expenses. It was a huge chest with several layers, but only the first layer contained anything. A few silver ingots, some loose silver pieces, and a few strings of bronze coins. There were 50 taels in total, together with the silver she had gotten on the day of her wedding, and after giving senior servant Gue 100 taels, she only had 400 taels left with her. She hadn't saved much from when she was still living at the Ingwar estate. Furthermore, her mother had died when she was young, so she didn't have any silver lying around. In total, she only had about 450 taels of silver she could use. If detect device equals desktop Google tag, command push function Google tag, display divgpt advian. Although Chu Lian's expression didn't change at all, senior servant Gue and Xian appeared to be holding back their emotions. Their mistress had lost her mother at a young age and wasn't in favor at the Ingwar estate. Chu Lian's stepmother, Third Madam, had kept Third Young Madam's dowry in her clutches. Third Master wasn't on her side either. The Ingwa household all thought that their sixth miss must have had some tremendous luck to marry into the Jing'an estate, and that she would be rolling in riches. The misses of the second branch were all jealous of her, so of course, none of them would contribute anything to the dowry of 6th Mississippi. If not for the Jing'an estate adding on a little to the dowry, then this pitiful amount would have been mocked by all. As a legitimate daughter of the family, her dowry couldn't even be compared to the dowry of an illegitimate daughter who was favored. After marrying into the He family, 6th Miss had also been treated callously by 3rd Young Master. It was fortunate that their 6th Miss wasn't upset over her marriage, otherwise she would have probably gotten sick from anger. Chu Lian wasn't bothered by what the servants next to her were likely thinking. She picked up the last box. This was her accessory box, and she had kept it since she was a young girl. After so many years, she only had this one box of accessories. Looking down at the box, Chu Lian felt a pang of sympathy for the original owner of this body. At the very least, she was a legitimate daughter of a duke's estate. However, her clothing and accessories were way too poor for her status. No wonder her personality had warped like that. Anyone's personality would change if they grew up in such an environment. Chu Lian retrieved the key she carried on her and opened up the box. The craftsmanship of the box was exquisite. There were 10 layers in total, and each layer was lined in bronze. There were even complicated-looking patterns carved on top. The bottommost layer in the box held the accessories she had been given when she was just born. Senior servant Gue had told her that she had probably worn them when she was around a year to 3 years old. There weren't many accessories she could wear in her infancy. So, this layer only had a few pairs of gold bracelets and anklets, as well as some necklaces and flowers made from gold and pearls. After rummaging about in the box, there were even a few good jade ornaments. It was clear that the original Chu Lian had been treated well when she had just been born, since she was 3rd Master's first child. The accessories in the second layer were the accessories she had worn after she had turned 3. There were a few head accessories, but it was obvious that they weren't as exquisitely made as the ones from her infancy. As she went through the layers, there were fewer and fewer accessories that were actually worth something. After the age of 10, there wasn't even a single gold accessory in the tray. All the accessories in the box weren't fit to wear now, because they had all been used before. Chu Lian picked out a few jade ornaments that had sentimental value, then sorted the gold accessories from the silver. She passed them to senior servant Gue and instructed her to have them melted into gold and silver pieces for future use. After organizing the box a little, Chu Lian turned to the accessory case she was currently using. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 70. Being a Virtuous Wife 1. Her current accessory case was made of fragrant rosewood and wasn't very big. However, it was rather finely made, consisting of multiple layers that Chu Lian began to open one by one. There were quite a few accessories inside, but the ones with any actual worth were few in number. While these accessories were fine for normal everyday wear, there weren't many that were suitable to wear for special occasions. There was only a ruby hair ornament decorated with colorful butterflies that she might be able to wear outside. This hair ornament had previously been mentioned in the novel as well. It had been given to Chu Lian by her mother. As for the rest, there were only the lucky jade amulet from Matriarch He and the crimson jade bangle from Countess Jinggan. Rightfully speaking, the Jinggan estate should have given their new family member some new accessories. However, for some reason, Chu Lian hadn't seen a single one. The maidservants had even complained about it. However, it only took a little bit of thought to figure out why. Since Changdi didn't like her, it was perfectly reasonable that he would shortchange her wherever possible. In the original novel, when Chu Lian had just married into the family, Sanlang had cared for her wholeheartedly. At the very least, he had never been stingy with clothing, accessories, or food. For hair ornaments alone, Changdi had prepared over 10 of them for her. That wasn't a small number. Chu Lian pursed her lips and closed the accessory case. Humph. She didn't care even if he hadn't prepared anything for her. She didn't need anything from him. Once she earned enough money, she would draw out some designs and send them to an accessory store. Chu Lian wasn't bragging. Back in the modern world, not only had she studied design, but she had also traveled the world as a gourmand, taking in different cultures and styles. Her usual hobbies had consisted of sightseeing and eating good food. She could be considered a globetrotter. Now that she was in the Great Wu dynasty, the only other thing that she was good at besides cooking was drawing. Chu Lian pushed away the accessory case and hugged her knees close to her, zoning out as she thought. Senior servant Gue and Xian's expressions changed as they watched her off to the side. The two servants exchanged glances and secretly decided never to mention the accessory matter in front of third young madam ever again, so that she wouldn't be frustrated over it. At the same time, Changdi entered the blacklist of Chu Lian's 2 most trusted servants. Which brides wouldn't have a few ornaments they could show off? Even the daughters of the common folk would have a few silver hairpins made in the latest styles when they were married. Not to mention the nobility. There weren't many who were treated as unfairly as their 6th Mississippi. Put everything away. Give the keys to Fuyan. Shall manage the accessory cases from now on. Xian, help Momo manage the expenses in our courtyard. Senior servant Gue looked like she had something to say, but when she saw that Chu Lian didn't seem to be in a good mood, she held herself back. Actually, Chu Lian wasn't in a bad mood at all. She was trying to calculate just how much she had in her private funds. After counting here and there, and adding on the gold and silver she would get from melting her accessories, she wouldn't get more than 600 taels. If anyone were to reveal that the legitimate third young madam of House Jinggan only had 600 taels to her name, no one would believe it. While observing and listening to the goings-on in this estate for the past few days, Chu Lian had discovered that the Jinggan estate was not as rich as the outside world believed it to be. At the very least, her mother-in-law, Countess Jinggan, didn't seem to be doing well. As for the matriarch, a granddaughter-in-law had no place in the inheritance of the matriarch's personal fortunes. If she wanted to live a good life, she could only depend on herself. Chu Lian sighed as she realized that it would be hard to be a layabout, no matter where she was. Especially a layabout whose husband could care less about her. After she had finished counting her personal funds, a maidservant reported from outside that someone had come to visit Songtao Court. Who would visit at this time? Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator TMR Chapter 71. Transmigrator Meets Reincarnator Chapter 71. Being a Virtuous Wife 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian put on her embroidered soft shoes, decorated with autumn chrysanthemums, and brought senior servant Gue and Xian over to the parlor. 3 people were standing in the parlor. A tall, thin, middle-aged senior servant was standing in the lead, while there were two maidservants dressed in light green dresses behind her. The three of them had average looks, but the aura surrounding them was imposing enough to make any onlooker feel uncomfortable. Chu Lian sat in the master's seat and looked at the three people before her. "What have you come here for?" Chu Lian asked, perplexed. Senior servant Zhong had been eyeing Chu Lian from the corner of her eyes since Chu Lian had come in. She saw that this new young madam was dressed in a peach-colored dress with a light pink gauze outer garment draped over her. Since she was in her own courtyard, she only wore a simple hairstyle, with a single peach blossom jade hairpin tucked into her lustrous black hair. Her tender youth still showed in her features, but in a few years, she would probably bloom into a beautiful lady. However, what attracted her the most was not Chu Lian's outstanding looks, but the pair of moist, bright eyes she carried. A single look seemed capable of seeing through anything, even human hearts. With her experience, senior servant Zhong subconsciously thought that someone with a pair of eyes like that couldn't possibly have a bad character. This third young madam that she was meeting now was very different from the one she had imagined. However, upon thinking of the orders that third young master had given her before he had left, senior servant Zhong put away her personal judgment. She stepped forward and lowered her head slightly. Although her looks were clearly average, her aura distinguished her from the crowd. "Third young madam, this old servant is senior servant Zhong. Together with Wenqing and Wanlan, we have been ordered by third young master to serve third young madam." Ah, Chu Lian gaped a little. To serve her? By he Changdi's orders? There were more than enough servants in the courtyard already. There were her 4 personal maidservants and senior servant Gue by her side, and 5 or 6 second-class and third-class maidservants around. There were also the ones who had originally been serving in Songtao Court. By sending in 3 more servants, they were running out of places to keep them. Senior servant Zhong saw that Chu Lian had nothing to say, and had only puffed up her cheeks a little while staring at her. Those bright, clear eyes were blinking at her so much that she felt uncomfortable under that gaze. Senior servant Zhong could only forge on. Third young master instructed this old servant to correct third young madam if there were any areas which needed improvement, whether in speech or conduct. Furthermore, this is a letter that third young master left for third young madam before leaving. Senior servant Zhong watched the expression on third young madam's face as she spoke, but she still had the same expression on. Her cheeks were puffed up while her head was tilted to the side. She looked so cute that the corners of senior servant Zhong's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Surely this third young madam wasn't an idiot? Any other newlywed bride would be shouting and scolding them by now. If detect device equals desktop Google Tag. Command push function Google Tag. Display Not only had her husband left, but he also thought so poorly of her that he had ordered his people to keep an eye on her while he was gone. Wasn't this a giant slap in the face? Chu Lian's expression hadn't changed because she hadn't thought of the motives behind he Changdi's actions. She said to senior servant Zhong, "Pass me the letter and let me take a look." Xian stepped forward and received the letter before passing it over to Chu Lian. Chu Lian looked at the strong and steadfast words written on the letter. "To my dear wife, Madam Chu." This letter was probably the only time he had ever addressed her as my dear wife. When she opened up the letter and pulled out the thin piece of paper within, there was only a single row of 10 or more words written on it. Her face flushed red with anger when she finished reading it. "While I'm away killing enemies in the north, I hope my wife remembers how to act virtuously." The word virtuously was even written in bright red, as if he was afraid she would miss it. TL note: the tiers of servants go like this: senior servants, personal maidservants, second class, third class, unranked. Welcome to Annie's story and adventure. Join Annie on a thrilling journey filled with captivating love stories, heartfelt experiences, and exciting adventures. Our channel blends vibrant life moments with the elegance of wine culture.